Hello and welcome to the Visible Man podcast. I'm Jack Rollins, the producer for the show. On today's episode, taken from a live talk hosted on the VM Discord server, Jeff will speak with divorce attorney, speaker, blogger, radio personality, and host of the Divorcing Well podcast, Leanne Townsend, who will give divorced parents some advice on how to survive the holidays. You'll hear Jeff interview Leanne for a while, and then he will open up the conversation to our live Discord audience for a Q&A. Just a quick reminder, this episode is educational in nature and not legal advice. If you need legal advice, please seek out the appropriate legal professional. And now, here's Jeff.
Thanks for joining us, Leanne. Thanks, Jack.
Happy to be here.
So I'm excited to chat with you tonight because the holidays are here, and it can be really hard for divorced families to go through that. And I know that you've seen a lot in what you've done in your practice. And so I'm really excited to hear what your perspective is on how to handle the holidays as a divorced parent.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenging time. Divorce in itself is challenging and, depressing for a lot of people. And you add in the holidays and, it adds a whole other layer to all of this. And I think particularly for people with children, it's challenging because, in the past, when you were together as a couple, you got to spend all of the holidays with your children. And now you're in a situation where generally you're looking at having to carve up part of the holidays, and you're not going to, be able to be with your children potentially Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or, other parts of the holidays. And that's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to deal with. And, the holidays are often a lonely time for a lot of people to begin with. So again, I think for people going through divorce, loneliness can be a big factor as well.
So I know that my first Christmas, it was terrible. We had separated in August or September, I think, and it was a few months later, and I took a picture of myself in this plaza, and it was just, I was by myself on Christmas morning, and it was one of the most lonely experiences I had had. So I guess before we get into it, I'm curious what got you into what you do now.
Well, it's a good question because I originally started my career in law as a prosecutor. And so I spent over 16 years in that role. But while I was in that role, my specialty became domestic violence. So I was, kind of dealing with a lot of family law aspects to begin with. And then when I left the prosecutor's office and went into private practice, I did some criminal defense work initially, but I found myself drawn into family law, and I went through my own divorce as well. And it really opened my eyes about, how challenging it can be on so many levels that you don't, even in my case, I knew the divorce was for the best, and I wasn't, I was on board that the marriage wasn't working, but I still found it, really challenging, as when I went through the divorce. So I ended up just kind of building more into that area, and I discontinued doing any criminal law work and then grew my family law practice.
Okay. So you've had personal experience with what it's like to go through this and have the first holidays after the divorce or even separation, and in terms of just how difficult it can be.
For sure. I know for myself, it was very hard. Even now, and I've been divorced for over 10 years. I don't have family here where I live, but my ex-husband does. So my kids always go with him for Christmas dinner because he's got the grandparents and the cousins, and so I'm okay with that because I know that's best for them. I don't have family here that we would get together with, so I have them Christmas morning and whatnot. But there is something about sitting there eating dinner by myself on Christmas Day And even though like I could go to friends and things like that, like it's not like I have to totally be alone. But there is something about it. And, even for my kids, at first I used to have to really push them to go, not because they didn't want to see their dad's family and be with their dad, but they felt bad for me being at home by myself. So I really had to explain to them that, no, it's okay. Like mom's fine with that. It's totally fine. Please go and have a good time. But, that's the thing I think too with the holidays is we often forget it's stressful on the children as well. The fact that they're not seeing both parents.
That's a totally new experience to separate, to take what used to be a kind of a united tradition or habits or whatever, and to have, like you bring up, the kids now see you as an individual, not as part of it, not necessarily as part of a couple. So it's particularly hard on them, I think, because it's a very unknown thing for them.
For sure. And as you just touched on when you mentioned traditions, like, when the couple is together, there's certain family traditions that the children have been growing up with. And now with mom and dad apart, the traditions are going to be different. And, I think that that's hard on everybody, that it's hard on the children and it's hard on the parents. And, one of the things that I say to my clients is that, it's a good opportunity to build some new traditions and come up with some new fun ideas that, can make it fun for the children so that they're more focused on the new fun, building new traditions versus, missing an old tradition that maybe they can't have any longer, because of the split and just the sharing of time, between their parents. I think, that's hard too. And I always tell people to focus on the children. If obviously if your children are adults, it's a bit different, but, or if you don't have children, but if you have young children, like focus on them and not like your own needs, your own ego, your own loneliness. Yes, you might feel lonely while they're, off at dinner with your ex on Christmas Day, but like in my case, if it makes sense for them to do that, then you have to, let that happen because that's best for them. And, enjoy your time while you have them.
Now you touched on something, coordinating a few minutes ago. And at least in my situation, probably many situations, there's sort of the letter of the law of the agreement. And then there's kind of a gray area where, I don't know, pickup times and days that are split and some flexibility. How do you have any thoughts on where that line falls and sort of like how it can get squishy and some of the things that you've seen in terms of coordinating?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the couple. And, ideally, you have a couple that isn't high conflict and, sees the bigger picture and has some flexibility. And because I think that, when you have an agreement, it's there obviously for when it's there to create consistency and predictability and, to have a fallback position. But, life happens. And, everyone who is separated or divorced at some point usually needs to not follow the exact letter of the agreement. It's their parenting time and they have another commitment that's come up that they have to honor or, things like that. And, so it's ideal when the parents can work together and be flexible and, make that work. And, even examples of that, I can rely again on my own marriage. Like in the early years, my kids were very young when we split up, like 1.5 and 3.5. And in the early years, I actually went to my ex's family for Christmas dinner because we were amicable enough at that point. We're not as amicable now, unfortunately, but for a number of years we were. And so I actually went along. And was it ideal for me to be around my ex-husband? No. Was it ideal for him to be around me? No. But we recognized that it made it better for the kids and we were able to, tolerate each other and be civilized and respectful. And so that worked for us. I mean, that wouldn't necessarily work for everybody and it reached a point where it wasn't working for us. But, that would be an example. I find, unfortunately, like I have some clients where it's very, very high conflict, and there's no, there's no room for maneuvering. There's no flexibility. It's the letter of the agreement. And so in those cases, the agreement is extremely important, or the court order. And usually in those cases, it's a court order, not an agreement. That, everything be spelled out, every last detail, because with a lot of high conflict couples, if there's anything that's gray, they will find a reason to fight about it. And the last thing anyone should want, and I know the last thing any lawyer wants, is to be rushing to court, on Christmas Eve or something with an urgent motion because of something like that.
Now, depending on what holiday you're celebrating, and there's a lot of gift giving coming up, and I personally still have to start my shopping. So I think we're in the first December 8th right now. So
yeah, you still got a little time.
I got a little bit of time, but that can be an issue, where you've now got two different households, two different incomes, whatever they are. And you've got kids that are used to getting a gift from mom and dad, or, dad and dad, or mom and whatever. So that can unravel some really complicated things. Do you have any thoughts or advice on how parents might handle that situation?
Definitely. And it is a reality. Two people together have a greater pool of money than, two people separate on their own. And, in a lot of relationships, there is an income differential, and the party who makes less money and is relying on support, may feel that the other party is spoiling the children with all of these, exciting gifts that the children are all excited about. And they may feel like what they're able to offer, isn't good enough. And of course it is. I mean, I can, say that Christmas is about love, and children are going to remember, feeling loved, and they're going to remember the time with their parents and all of that, more so than like the specific gift that maybe they're excited about in the moment. So, I would remind people, if I have clients in that situation, or listeners, I would remind them that, children, as I say, like, they're really not going to remember the gifts so much as the experience and the time, and that it was a happy occasion, and, they felt loved, and that's really what creates memories. And so, I think it's important to focus on that, and not, what the gift, whether your ex is out gifting you, you don't want to get into a competition there. And again, to always put the children first and be the bigger person. And, an example of that, I have a client right now, and he is in a, fairly high conflict situation, I would say, with his ex, but she went and bought the children bicycles for Christmas and asked him if he would contribute. And he did. He ended up paying for half the bicycles. And he's not even seeing his children right now, and he still did that. And I have so much respect for him for doing that, and for being the big person, and funding those bikes. A lot of other people would have been, well, I'm not even seeing the kids, and she's been horrible to me, and why am I going to do that? And all of that. So again, I think in his case, he put the children first, rather than his own ego or his anger at his ex, which, he certainly deserves to have a lot of anger in the situation. So I think, the more people can do things like that around the holidays, I think the better.
I was talking with somebody in the server about that exact situation, not bikes, but it was a coat, actually, where there was this guy that was it was limited time with one of his kids, and but he was being asked to contribute to a gift that he's like, I don't even see him, and and now I'm got to pay for it. So there's a lot of resentment, anger. I know that as parents in that situation, we've got to internalize a bunch of that, or handle it.
And it's hard. I mean, it's easier said than done for sure. And, and then the other part, I think my client probably wondered this, and, people in that situation might is like, is she even telling them?
Mm-hmm.
Me too, like if you're not seeing the kids, if you're at least talking to them, that helps, that you can say that, but you don't even know what the message is that's being given to the kids. So you're really being a big person, if you don't even, know if they're going to know that it's from you. But then, a true altruism, of course, isn't about, the applause and the thank yous, that, and the acknowledgement. It's just about doing the right thing. So, I would say that's what people need to focus on as best they can.
Yeah. One of the situations you mentioned earlier was if a kid doesn't want to go. And I know that some of the guys in the server have faced this situation where now that the house is split and there's sort of a affinity for one house over the other, or even just I don't want to go to that situation. Any thoughts on how to handle that? I mean, do you force them to go, or do you respect it, or at what age do you start talking about this? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a very challenging situation, and it is something that comes up a lot, especially when as kids go through different ages and stages as well. And so, first off, I would always encourage all parents to respect the role of the other parent in their children's life, and to encourage and support and facilitate that as much as possible. So to honor, agreements and court orders and things like that. So if you have children and they don't want to go, you should encourage them to do so. I mean, I think that part of it is getting at the reason why they don't want to go. Is there a new partner with, the other parent that the child doesn't like being around? Is there, is the other parent got a problem, say, with substance abuse, and so they're not present, are there actual real issues you need to be concerned about? Or is, one parent influencing them? That's obviously, a very difficult situation if you have a parent who's trying to alienate the other parent, because then if the child doesn't want to go, they're going to be like, yes, and they're going to try to take advantage of that, right? But if you're dealing with people who truly, are not in a situation where there's like abuse or neglect, and they want to facilitate that relationship, then they really should push their children to go. Even if the child is crying, I think that they should be encouraged and pushed a little bit. And then if it's an ongoing problem, then I think then the couples have to look at other solutions. But I think I'll resort back to my own marriage. There were times, when my daughter, who was the youngest, sometimes she didn't want to go to her father's, and we just kind of took each situation as it was. And so, sometimes I would make her go, and, within minutes of getting to his place, she would be happy and smiling, and the tears would go away, and it was all fine. And then there were other times when, like, there seemed to be a good reason that she didn't want to go. And so we respected that, and she didn't go. But I think it's also important that children don't get the message that they're in charge of the schedule. It's the parents who are in charge of the schedule. The children don't dictate it. But again, having said that, when children reach a certain age, like when they start getting into their tweens and teens, they have more of a voice, and it's much harder to make a 14 or 15-year-old, child go to the other parent if they don't want to. And, that's where it can be challenging, and the children, definitely have more say.
Somebody in the server that's listening just said that my daughter, now that she's older, she's 18, doesn't want to stay overnight at her mom's, but she doesn't mind going there, but just doesn't want to stay overnight. So that you're spot on with the fact that, at least in my experience, the tweens and teens, when you want to start to respect their opinion, then
yeah. And sometimes they want to be with their friends. Like it's, and that's where I think too, like parents need to take their ego out of it. Like just because the child doesn't want to come, it's not necessarily a rejection of them or a lack of love for them. It may be just as simple as their 13-year-old wants to hang out with their friends and their friends live closer to the other parent's house or, something like that. And that's why they don't want to go. And it has nothing to do with their relationship with their parents.
Yeah.
They
Now
like
I
the other
guess I want
parent's house better. That's something that comes up sometimes, which is a problem. Like if a couple splits up and one parent stays in the matrimonial home and the other moves out, that's where sometimes you see problems because the children like to be at the matrimonial home. So they're more inclined to want to be there more often. And that can sometimes be challenging.
I can vouch for that. I visited the matrimonial home on Christmas morning, and it was a bit like taking a wound and putting salt in it for a little bit, and then washing it down with a little bit of Bailey's. It was a little rough. So actually, that was kind of the next thing I wanted to ask you about is we've talked a lot about kids, and I can say that on my first Thanksgiving that I was alone, I'm not proud of this, but I drank a lot and I sobbed my eyes out. And there was a big gap between this, white picket fence and everybody's home to the fact that I was alone that day. As people face this in the holidays, I mean, people listening to this might be their first holiday going where they're by themselves without their kids for a little while, or even just separated. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of how people can take care of themselves or at least brace themselves for this experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that, people do self-care through this. I think, the holidays, I think, are just naturally a lonelier time. I don't have the stats, but I do think I remember hearing, statistically, there's more suicides, at this time of year. And so I think that, if someone out there listening is going through separation and divorce right now, and whether it's their first holiday or not, I think they should brace themselves that it will be challenging, that, being away from, the family unit that you knew, or if you're being away from your children, can be hard and it can be lonely. And even if you don't have children, if you're just, you were a couple and now you're apart and you're on your own, or, even if you're getting together with family and people are questioning you, like, what's going on, like, why are, and putting their own 2 cents into your, your marital situation, like, that's always hard too. So, I mean, I think, self-care is really important. I think that it's also important not to isolate. It's really important, to surround yourself with friends. If you don't have family, have, at least one good friend, or, somebody who you can talk to, or, if you can get out in the fresh air and do things in nature, that's always helpful. I think the worst thing somebody can do is just kind of stay home by themselves, feeling lonely, because that can lead to getting it. I find, I think any of us, when we get into our own head too much, that's always a problem. So I think, things to just distract you and just get around people, I think is probably the most important thing. And, if you're really struggling, like if you're feeling like suicidal or something like that, then obviously, reach out and call a hotline or call somebody who can help you. Don't stay in that mindset for a second.
Yeah, for sure. And just to put in a mild plug for Visible Man on the server, we'll be around on the holidays. So if you're lonely or just want to shoot a text out, there's probably going to be somebody hanging out, and we'll have crisis lines in the show notes. Now you have seen a lot of cases in your practice, I'm sure, about men and women going through this, and VM is we focus on guys and trying to make sure that guys are well. Have you seen any particular struggles that are different, or has it been a pretty across the board similar experience? Do women have the same supports as men, or any observations that you've had?
That's a great question. I mean, from what I've seen, I think men have less support out there. I do think there's more support for women. And even just, I think naturally women are more comfortable talking, about their feelings. And if they're feeling low, they're more liable to reach out to a friend and talk to that friend, or they're more liable to seek out therapy and things like that. I think men, from my understanding of men, like they when they get together with their friends, they don't usually, spend a lot of time talking about their feelings. And so, I think from that standpoint, women just, there is more support for them, which is why I think, like what you're doing here is fantastic. And I think that, programs that are out there for men are so important, because I do think that they tend to be a more neglected group. And I think that the holidays are, equally hard on, both parties. I think that just because men maybe don't voice it as easily as women do, it doesn't mean that they're not suffering inside.
Yeah, I think I specifically took a note of what you were saying before about don't be alone, don't isolate. That if I could, I think that's my middle name especially after this pandemic is now that I work from home and I'm a dude and I just don't get out as much as I should. So I think having support is definitely makes a huge difference in getting out in nature, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, even just like for me, I know like exercise, like just moving the body, because it gets the endorphins going, so it can kind of help get you out of a down, state if you're feeling down. And, you just touched upon the pandemic. And, that's another thing, like so many people are more isolated right now to begin with, and they're working from home and they're not getting the same social interaction. So then you lump in the holidays, I think it's even worse. So that's why it's even more important, not to just isolate, to get out and, talk to people and just, spend some time out of your home, no matter how down you're feeling, like just push yourself to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I faced when I was first, well, I guess I still kind of face it, is the involvement of the family of my ex, or a person's ex in their situation. And how would you handle that situation? Because like the separation or divorce is between the parents. But when I don't know, a sibling or a parent or something like that, or the other of the ex gets involved and wants to influence it, any advice?
Yeah, those situations are tough. Meddling in-laws are, they're problems even when people are married, let alone, when you're separating and divorcing and, they never liked you to begin with and now it's to go crazy. And as a lawyer, I find like that's one of my most challenging things. I hate it when someone's family starts getting involved and trying to, tell my client what to do and how things should be done. And they're Googling away on, Google law, telling, why isn't your lawyer doing this? And why isn't your lawyer doing that? And so it can be very meddlesome. So, I mean, first of all, if someone out there listening is a family member of somebody going through separation or divorce, I would say be supportive, but don't, but know where that line is that you shouldn't be meddling. Don't give your opinion if it's not asked for, and certainly don't involve yourself with the ex, no matter how much you might dislike them and feel really angry at them for what they did to your family member. It's not it's not your place to get involved and give them a piece of your mind, and it's not going to help a situation. So stay out of it. But be supportive. The best thing you can do is just be supportive for your family member. If you're in that situation and you're on the receiving end of, your ex's family, that's a tough situation, because if your ex isn't telling them to stay out of it, you don't have their support on it. And so, I mean, all you can really tell yourself is that you don't have to listen to them. They don't have a say in things. And if they're being disrespectful to you or abusive in some way, then I would say remove yourself from the situation immediately.
That makes sense. So we've had people listening in, and we have some questions that are kind of rolling in. So I'd like to transition to those.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, first question. Should you sign a gift from both parents if the ex isn't giving any? So it usually applies to younger kids who might not understand exactly what's going on.
That's a great question. And I mean, it's obviously not a legal question or anything. So I'm kind of, some of the things we're talking about they're not, within my expertise as a lawyer, but they're more just my experience dealing with people, on a regular basis who are going through these situations. So, I mean, my advice on that is to, follow your intuition. I think if you think that that's going to be best for your child, because if your child's going to be wondering, like, why didn't I get a gift from the other parent, and you think it's going to make them feel bad, then that might be the right thing to do, to put their name on it as well. And, so your child is happy, they think they got a gift from both their parents. So that I would just try and look at it through the eyes of your child and what you think is best for the child. And that's the best way to handle it.
Okay, next question is about seasonal depression. How do you deal with seasonal or holiday depression when the kids are around, and being without them is not an option because they're too young?
Yeah, I mean, and I want to, like, I'm not a therapist, obviously, or anything like that. So, I mean, certainly I would defer to the advice of a therapist, counselor, psychologist on that. I think that, from what I've seen with clients and just my own experience, I know when you're down, it's very hard. Like, I would say through my own divorce, the one thing that really kept me going was having my children, because, who knows, I might have wanted to just stay in bed and pull the covers over my head and not get out of bed, but I had to, because I had 2 children I had to, to look after and tend to. So on some level, that can be helpful. But I know when you're not feeling it, it can be very hard, when you've got your children around and you want to, make things, good for them. So, I mean, I would say on that, just, I guess, if you're aware you have seasonal depression, ideally speak to a therapist and get their advice on, some of the things that you can do to help with it, whether that involves, medical or non-medical solutions, and self-care, and don't beat yourself up for feeling down. I mean, it's something we don't have control over. And, just don't beat yourself up if you're struggling. Just try and get the help that you need and supports in place that you need, so that you can be the best parent for your children that you're capable of.
Okay, next question. How do you handle an ex who just doesn't cooperate without being the bad guy?
That's hard, and it's really hard, because you don't want to obviously involve your children in the middle of something. And when, your ex is being difficult, it's hard. And so I think the one thing I can say is that as children grow older, they do get to realize what their parents are really like. And they do tend to, a lot of the things about your ex that drive you crazy, your children do eventually start seeing that themselves as they get older, without you having to, even say a word. But when you're in the situation, it's hard. I mean, all I would say is, you don't want to involve the children in it, and try and explain to your children maybe the rationale behind why you're taking a certain position. Ideally explain to your ex, if you can, that, like, this is hurting the children because, we're not being, consistent here. If it's a situation where one parent is disciplining more than the other, so the more discipline-oriented parent feels like they're the bad guy, ideally you want to try and get on the same page as each other. But the reality is, like, the households will be different. And so I guess the only advice I have on that is just to, explain to your children why you're doing what you're doing, or taking the position you're taking, without saying bad things about your ex. And as they grow older, they will see things, more clearly. But you have to kind of bite your tongue a lot, and, find a way of dealing with the aggravation so your children don't pick up on it.
That's good advice. Next question is, rotating Christmas every year in the best interest of the kids, even if one parent is not dealing with their own issues in the best way?
Yeah, I mean, again, everything is very fact specific. So, what I'm about to answer is, going to be on a general basis because I don't know this listener's specific situation. And I know that the courts generally consider time with both parents to be more important than some of these other things like consistency or, just regular, parenting stuff. So I think like if the matter were in court, a judge would say, yes, the rotating of the schedule is more important than, the other party getting themselves together. But I think it depends on what you mean by that as well. I mean, if they've got a drug or alcohol problem that they're not dealing with and it is affecting their parenting, then maybe the regular schedule isn't going to be the right thing for the children because this person needs to get treatment or get therapy or do something before they're able to parent properly. So it really depends on how, or if it's just more that they're they need, I think we could all benefit from therapy. So if it's someone who could benefit from therapy but they don't have something that's significantly affecting their parenting ability, like addiction or mental illness, things like that, then I think that the rotating is what a court would follow because a judge would say that that's what the ideal is. But, if, as they say, I mentioned mental health because that is something too. I mean, if somebody is in a state of severe depression and they're like not able to get out of bed, for example, then obviously if the children come, that's a problem. Like, how are they able to parent the children? And so, that would be a situation where that person should probably get treated for depression and, if they don't want to do it on their own, almost be forced into it on some level. Again, I'm not a mental health expert, so I don't want to, address that, too much, but if, the bottom line is if it's affecting someone's ability to parent on a significant level, then it doesn't make sense for the children to be, going there.
Yeah. Yeah. Now somebody asked a question that I think resonates with a bunch of the guys in the server. Is anything like holiday spending or kids' birthdays taken into account when it comes to child support, when it comes to those times of the month? Those times of the year, it's like in holidays and buying gifts.
Well, I can only comment, like I live in Toronto and I'm in Ontario, so I'm licensed to practice law here. And so here, like things like gifts and whatnot, that should just be coming out of, well, I mean, it depends on how you're doing it. If your spouse is getting gifts from both of you, then their share of the gifts would be coming out of the child support, but and it depends on how, it's kind of a judgment call, I guess. It's not like there's a case that specifically addresses this. If you're paying $10,000 a month in child support, then presumably that should be able to include gifts. But, I think it really depends. In a lot of cases when people aren't together, they get their own gifts, right? Each parent gives their own gifts to the children. So dad pays for his and mom's paying for hers, and whoever's getting child support, they could be using the child support towards that. But it's not like you have to give extra to your spouse to pay for, gifts. It's really, it should come at the spouse who's receiving a child support, it should come out of their, child support money. But whether they put your name on it or not, you may have to still get your own gifts or contribute extra.
So I'm going to make a note that I don't have to pay extra child support. That's I think that's what I heard.
Yeah. You don't have to pay extra child support. Bottom line.
So I have 1.5 questions left. Which would you like first, the half or the first? Half or the one?
Let's do the full question.
Okay, the one is what can somebody do today to prepare for the holidays in a couple of weeks?
Well, hopefully you have your schedule already sorted out. And if you don't, that's something to get on right away. So hopefully if you have children, who the children are going to be with and when and what the breakdown is going to be. That's number one. And number two, I'd say is the time that you're going to have your children with you. Plan some fun things, plan like some new traditions. If especially if it's your first, holiday period, separated or divorced, create some new traditions that'll be fun for the family to be involved in. But also plan for your time alone, because I think you can expect that it will be hard and you will feel lonely and, you'll feel down. And so I think it's important to, make plans with friends or other family during the times you're not going to have your children with you. Make plans to do something, just things, make sure you have activities in place that you find fun or that you enjoy, and that you've got lots of self-care planned during those time periods as well.
That's good advice. Yep. The half question, which house does Santa come to?
Good question. I would say Santa comes to both houses, but I think that's up to mom and dad to decide.
That's probably very true. That's a good point. Well, I appreciate so much your advice and your thoughts and perspectives, Leanne. Thanks. I really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and hopefully I've been able to add give some help to somebody out there listening.
I'm sure you have. And thank you all for listening in. If you're watching or listening to the podcast, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And for Visible Man, this is Jeff Hoffman. Thanks for joining us.